part has to do with number 18 on the handout. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about what Leibniz means by saying that there are no perceptions which are matters of complete indifference to us. And secondly, why that's an important claim for his vision of the law of order.
That quotation comes from the New Essays in the context of the place where Leibniz is also talking about these unconscious urges. So I take that to mean there's nothing indifferent to us with regard to its value. Nothing to which we don't have some kind of urge to avoid it or to attain it. Now, how's that of relevance to the order of the universe? Well, my thought was that the order of the universe is exemplified in every monad. And what we find in every monad are cognition of the world and responsiveness to the good things in the world. And that is an indication that the world is, in fact, can be understood in such a way that it is going along from one valuable state to another valuable state. Now, perhaps better. There are, for Leibniz, not degrees of cognition, not degrees of expression or degrees of perception, but there certainly are grades of perception. And the highest grade is intellect. What this suggests about the universe as a whole is that understood in the best way it's possible to understand something, which is to say by intellect, understanding what the world is involves seeing what is good in it and how it progresses from one state, how the order in it is an order according to the progression from a present state to the next state that has as much good in it as is possible given the previous state. So the intelligibility and the good directed order of the universe would be exemplified in every monad.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I have a question about the notion of law that underlies your argument on page 18 that no law suffices to determine the actual states of a monad. I find this surprising. I can see then there's something of an argument for it, but I was wondering if the argument for it didn't depend on a notion of law which is, say, more suitable to Kant rather than Leibniz. One main difference between them, it seems to me, when they think about these things is that Kant does not think of laws in terms of mathematical functions. He thinks of them in terms of whenever A, then B type statements, which is a kind of a primitive grasp of law, you might say. But he wasn't a mathematician. He didn't do mathematics very well. Leibniz, by contrast, at least sometimes seems to be thinking of laws in terms of functional relationships which are described mathematically. And one great advantage of that kind of functional relationship is that a simple, short expression has enormous power. So you can give, say, for example, the law of universal gravitational attraction as an inverse squared law which governs infinitely many cases. You don't have to say whenever A, then B, whenever A1, then B1, and so on. You just get a simple little formula.
Yeah.
And I wonder, your argument is based on the fact that no two transitions within the monad are ever exactly alike. And I wonder, is that enough to establish, given, for example, in the Discourse on Metaphysics, when Leibniz says, give me any set of points on a plane. There is a line that can be drawn through them, and there is a simple function which describes that line. He's clearly thinking of this in terms of mathematics, right? And to what extent is he thinking of the law of the series in terms of a mathematical function rather than an if-then kind of primitive causal law? And if he is, then is this argument going to go through? That's the question.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think that the law of the series of the monad is probably best understood functionally, actually, as specifying the kind of thing a monad does under such and such circumstances. It's a kind of law that's going to take inputs and give you outputs, but it's not expressed mathematically, of course. It's expressed in terms of the goal. So I think of these goal-oriented entelechy, the laws, as being functional in that way. To what extent that produces an economy of expression? I mean, obviously it does. I've not arrived at a happy formulation of what I think one of these laws would actually look like. But I'll get to what I take your point to be, that as far as that argument goes, it pertains to any attempt to assimilate every transition that occurs in a monad to any regularity whatsoever. Not that they can't be described that way and represented that way, but what actually goes on is always more specific than that, more detailed than that. And this is a characteristic of theory in general that comes out in various works of Leibniz. Theories can be more or less fine-grained in terms of the size of the things or the events they talk about. But no matter what theory you get, there will always be more detail, which your theory doesn't capture, which is explanatorily relevant. But it couldn't be expressed by any theory. It's always going to elude any general representation of it. That's the argument I have in mind.
So can I just quick follow-up then? So you're saying that Leibniz would not admit, say, a law of the form. Laws have to be general. So whenever A, then B, whenever A1, then B1, whenever A2, then B2, infinitely long. So even if there was no order, we might say, in the monadic changes, it could capture every single transition just by listing them. That isn't allowed as a law, is it?
Definitely not. It has no explanatory value. It's just saying what happens.
In a general form, though. Whenever A, then B, even though it only happens once, right?
We would have time for one more question. Yes, thank you.
So, yeah, I have 3 quick ones. They will be quick. So, initially, at some point, you raised a question of that was going to be crucial, which is why I think that for Leibniz, perception rather than apperception is expressive in a particularly mental way or involving cognizance. That was going to be crucial rather than like the map or the expressiveness of other material things. So then your answer, I think, was that perception is mental because of its role in appetition, and appetition is mental because of its indirectness or that teleological form of intentionality. And so then here are my questions. First, why think that appetition qua indirected must be mental, given, as you note, there's this tradition of thinking that there's no particular mentalness to it, that it can happen without our cognizance. You even have in quote 17, can happen without us being really aware of things. Now, in your answer to Julia, you suggested that, well, the reason why is because it has this multiform object, or it can be directed towards multiple objects. There's a kind of multiform apprehension that goes on. That's what makes it mental rather than mechanical. It sounded like that was one answer.
Maybe I could just stop you there.
Yeah.
I was suggesting that what makes it mental is that the laws that explain its change are not laws about the properties of modifications of monads as such, but rather laws about what's represented by the structural modifications of monads. So it's the role that what's represented plays in the causal explanation of the transition from one state to another state that I was suggesting argues in favor of its generally mental character. I mean, would it help to put it this way? The laws the causal laws with regard to a monad operate over intentional states, whereas the laws of efficient causality that operate over bodies operate over extensional properties, properties that have nothing to do, properties irrespective of what they might represent, what their semantic value is.
So then,
like with
so
a computer.
Yeah, so the objects that go into the laws are themselves states that have this kind of representational,
It's in
feature.
virtue of what they represent
Yeah.
that they're causally relevant.
but it's not, you're not saying that it's because in the process of taking those states up and turning out something as an effect, the cause or the nexus of that causality has to be aware of it in some
No,
way.
no, no.
Yeah, okay,
No,
good.
no.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. And so then, yeah, actually that just answers all of them. Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
Well, that's splendid. Shall we thank Mark?